Welcome to In My Element. This is Tammy. I am in my Honda element. I'm in my element, sharing with you some of my knowledge about dealing with persistent pain, both as a patient and then as a physiotherapist and yoga teacher. So this episode is going to be talking about why sometimes pain doesn't go away, or we continue to experience our world as pain. And sometimes when we have an injury, we have pain that's relative to the injury, but then the injury kind of gets better, but then the body is still perceiving sort of things as if they're painful. It's creating guarding, muscle tension, all kinds of things. So I want to talk to you a little bit about how the brain works and how the nervous system works in this episode today, and tell you sort of a little bit of information about why we have that link between the world and pain sometimes, when it really should be the world and experience. So think of some instances where it's just really easier to think of all the things I've ever done wrong. It's easier to kind of name my weaknesses. It's easier to name my flaws. Easier to recall all the bad things I've ever done. Why is that? It's because there's a strong emotional link to those episodes where we feel an intense amount of emotion, either embarrassment, shame, anger, fear, all those kinds of things. And so when we have an injury, it's usually not a pleasant experience. You know, when it happens, we're either tripping and falling, or we bump into something, or we throw a ball and we feel, something tweak in our shoulder. So there's always that pain is a very strong imprint on the nervous system. So our nervous system likes to pay attention to things that have a certain amount of change. So gradual stuff. Nervous system in your brain. So when I say nervous system, I mean your brain, your mind, the nerves that communicate from your sort of central computer to the rest of your body. So things that are sort of gradual, we don't take notice of. So think of it this way. If you are looking at yourself every day in the mirror, which, brushing your teeth, doing your hair, whatever you're doing, you're not going to see those small changes necessarily unless you see a photo of yourself from, 10 years ago and you're like, OMG, I'm aging. Also, little kids that grow very gradual, right? If you don't see somebody for a couple months and then all of a sudden you see them, especially like a little kid, you're like, oh wow, look at the change. But then maybe they don't see it themselves, or maybe the parents don't see the child aging or progressing or that kind of thing. So oftentimes we, as we're getting better or improving, whether it's from an injury or just generally improving, we often don't sort of have that front of mind, because it's small changes, it's small increments. So our nervous system and our brain is really efficient. It's meant to notice big changes, because then the brain is like, ooh, is that something I need to address? Is that something I need to take care of? It sort of draws the attention. So in the same way that our injury or our pain has a strong emotional imprint, then sometimes what happens is when we have an injury, that's a big event. That's sort of something your nervous system's like, okay, we got to send repair cells there. We have to create a little bit of healthy inflammation to try to repair this. We're going to set all these things in motion. And then often comes with that is muscle guarding or muscle tension, or like the body will rotate, say, a shoulder into a more protective sort of position. And then a lot of my clients ask me, well, why doesn't that go away when I'm better? And it's because getting better is a much slower process than getting injured in a lot of cases. Or you've been injuring something slowly, but there's been no pain, and there's always that one moment. So that's kind of how I kind of explain it to my clients, is that the brain tends to pay attention to big things. So if something has a strong emotional imprint at the same time, that becomes even more sort of prominent to the nervous system. And so there's no big moment when we get better, usually. Sometimes there's those miraculous physio sessions where it's like, oh my God, I feel so much better. And it's like, boom. Most of the time though, we get better gradually. And so some of those guarding mechanisms or those things that your nervous system put in place to protect you initially don't necessarily get shut off. So our recovery needs to be intentional. We have to intentionally sort of shut off those protective mechanisms with mobility, stretching, retraining those muscles and things like that. So from a physiotherapy perspective or a rehab perspective, sometimes if you're having prolonged sort of symptoms and things like that, when you sort of feel like things are actually moving properly and that kind of stuff, so it's really nice to kind of understand that waiting around for it to kind of readjust or reset is not necessarily what always happens. We have to be very intentional about that. Now in the same vein, we can imprint on our nervous system like the good things. So that's why I always promote, like, what are the wins? What are the good things? What's the progress? And so when people come into my office, I used to be like, so how are you? What's your pain like? Whereas now I kind of go, hey, like, tell me something good. What are the wins this week? And it kind of, we have to stop and like kind of go, oh, right, what are the wins? So we're very much primed, I think, as like a survival mechanism to look out for danger, for bad things, because we want to see if those things are a threat to us. So we have to, like, in a lot of cases, turn on that intention of like, what are the wins? And a lot of times people are like, yeah, I don't feel like I'm getting any better. And I'm like, well, are you able to sit for more than 5 minutes? Because last week, like 5 minutes and you were getting them walking around, and they're like, oh yeah, come to think of it, yeah, I can actually sit for like about 20 minutes now. I'm like, all right, check, that's a win. And then we kind of go through and kind of like tease out those like little wins. And so because they're small and they're gradual, it's hard to recognize. So that's why I love this practice of, like, at the end of the week, like, weekly wins list. I've shared that on another platform. If you'd like a link to that sort of worksheet, I can send that to you. Just send me a message in the comments below. Or, a gratitude list at the end of every day. Write down 3 things that like went well. So focusing our mind on some of the things that are like progress and wins can kind of imprint that on your nervous system. So then your brain goes, oh, okay, we are doing better. We are feeling better. We're making progress, things like that. So this can be applied to a lot of things in terms of like emotional well-being, mental well-being. But in this case, I'm talking about the physical in terms of like retraining your brain to recognize the good parts, to help it understand that, we're doing better. It doesn't need to keep guarding you and things like that. So combining that mental strategy with safe movement and mobility and in a progressive way to get the nervous system sort of happy to be letting you do your thing without making adaptive sort of compensation type of things as its new normal is always a great way to go. I hope that helps. There's a lot of different ways of dealing with pain and injury. I like this one to add into the mix because if my brain is going to be paying attention to things because there's an emotional connection to it, then I want to give it emotional connection to the stuff I want it to pay attention to. So that's kind of the message here, is that this is how our brain works. It really, responds to something big, sudden, also if that big sudden thing has an emotional connection to it, sort of like a brand or an imprint. So if we can intentionally create more positive emotional ties to our progress, to our wins, to the positive thing, we can steer what your brain is paying attention to so that it has the information it needs to reset some of the ways that it's managing your injury, your painful area, or whatever. Instead of just it had a big boom, it was like, oh, let's protect, and then it just doesn't really kind of let go very well. So part of rehab and physio is creating healthy natural movement that's progressive, that kind of shows your brain and you also that it's okay, we don't need the guarding, blah blah blah. So That's a really great strategy I like to use. So making lists of like wins and gratitude and stuff is not just woo woo. It actually draws your brain's attention to the good stuff, creates a bit of a link or a brand to that, and then it's not just responding with protective or compensation. It is going to respond with sort of resetting to natural, normal musculoskeletal movement.